Members of a black community find comfort in the works of Tupac Shakur. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today I want to talk about a book that I've read, one that is on my 2025 TBR, so I'm getting through a huge chunk of that. And today's book is all about Tupac Shakur and a big purpose, things like that. I am referring to After Tupac and D. Foster by Jacqueline Woodson, which was published in 2008. For those who don't know, Jacqueline Woodson is a Black American writer who has been getting their work published since the 90s. They primarily write about the Black experience. They write about LGBT type of things. They write novels for adults as well as middle grade literature, which is what I'm talking about here today. It's also important to note that Jacqueline Woodson is gay. I did not intend for me to talk about an LGBT writer in Pride Month, or at least this book to be that way, because I had planned this like back in December, but that's how it turned out. And so I'm talking about LGBT writers during this period of Pride, so at least it's fitting in with that, but I would have talked about this outside of this period of Pride too. So I just think it's an interesting sort of coincidence. It should also be noted that this book was nominated for a Newbery Award, which is pretty prestigious. But I think it's important to talk about like whether it really earned that, whether it holds up in that way, because there's been a number of Newbery honorees that haven't really been that great. Like even for middle grade literature, like I don't think some of the writing holds up. So we'll check that out as I talk about this later, and really just talk about what ideas it's sending towards young adults, because that's important to talk about as well. And so without further ado, let's talk about After Tupac and D. Foster. I'll do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So After Tupac and D. Foster focuses on an unnamed narrator who recalls a time before their friend D. Foster left the community, a time before Tupac Shakur died in the 90s. They live in, I think Queens, is it? They live in New York City. In a black neighborhood, and they're friends with a girl named Nika, and they later become friends with another young girl named Dee, who lives in the foster system in this area. Tupac Shakur is in the background. His life is sort of affecting his life, and his music is affecting the young people, everyone really in this community. And at the beginning of the story, we see that the narrator and Nika are making friends with Dee. She shows up in the neighborhood, and they're kind of like not sure what to do with her because they've never known her, and also she's in the foster care system. So, what is that going to bring? But they slowly become friends over time. And in the background, Tupac is shot, manages to survive, and goes to prison, which a lot of the people in the community think he's being made an example of because of his music, because he proclaims to be a gangster, among many other things. And then back in the community, Dee convinces the others, Nika and the narrator, to leave the block, which their moms don't want them to do. But they end up going somewhere at night to a local park and hang out there, and they feel a bit more free for the experience rather than having sort of stayed in their community for a particularly longer amount of time. But they eventually go back home. A short while later, the narrator and Nika's family go visit Nika's brother Tash in prison. Tash is gay, and he was friends with a stranger that he met, and he told the stranger about another person who was gay, and that person let Tash play the piano and practice and become a bit more proficient. This person was not happy about such things, but led Tash to believe that he wanted to be in a relationship with him. And they went, and that person ended up robbing the other person, but they also like hit that person pretty hard, so they didn't remember a lot of the situation. They accused Tash of being in on the whole thing, and Tash ended up in prison, but eventually that person recanted and said that Tash had nothing to do with it. So Tash is free, but it's a harrowing experience going to the prison, especially for Nika's mother, who has to watch one of her children be behind bars. And then a short while later, we see Dee's mother has come back into her life, and Dee's real name is Desiree, which is interesting. Dee doesn't really know what to do. She feels like she wants to stay in the foster care system to be around her friends some more, whereas if she goes with her mother, they have to go upstate, and there's going to be less contact between them. But ultimately, Dee makes the decision to go be with her mom because she wants that in her life. And then a short while later, Tupac is shot again, and he ends up dying. There's a sad phone call between the narrator and Dee on the phone, highlighting their growing kind of distance because of Dee spending more time with her mother and getting to know her again. And then as the story comes to a close, the narrator just reflects on what it was like to have known Dee, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's a fair bit to talk about with this story. One of the themes that Woodson is working with here is that of cultural heroes, cultural icons. Many communities have, cultural heroes. In China, there's Mao. In Japan, I wish I had a better thing to say. I don't. There's, the emperor is pretty big in Japan, and in America, we have our Hollywood stars and whatnot. But within sub-communities and whatnot, subcultures, there are cultural heroes, and Woodson highlights the effect that Tupac Shakur had on this black community, really like the black community at large, because he was a huge figure in the 90s. His music was extremely popular. Gangster rap in particular was taking off, and you had the rise of figures like Snoop Dogg and Biggie Smalls and other such people. And this sort of provided an outlet for people to sort of see themselves on TV, especially for black individuals who that wasn't really an option before. And to hear people talking about issues that affected them in their communities. And Dee here finds meaning in Tupac's art. When she listens to his music, she, especially his song about his mother, she talks about how she feels the same way about her mother, and how there's a troubled relationship there, but she knows that her mother will come back one day to raise her, which Nika and the narrator have doubts about, but they support Dee in her hopes. And it's through listening to Tupac that Dee is able to make sense of the world, which is beautiful, and it's what happens for a lot of people. They rely on music or books, in my case, to sort of better understand the world and sort of see themselves within it. And others in the community feel seen as well. I know Jay Jones, who is Nika's brother in this story, remarks that Tupac's lyrics help him better understand his interactions with the police or other people in the community, especially those who make fun of his brother for being gay. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. Jay Jones turned to Nika. You walk off this block and there ain't love like it is on these stairs. Brothers on the court be saying things about Tash make you want to holler. Tupac comes on and starts blasting them in the face about the hating, and they can't do nothing but shut the hell up, 'cause he's regular, but he ain't regular. Gets big respect from people. And that's an interesting quote that just sort of gets at the fact that people in the community sort of respond to Tupac's lyrics. They're shouting hate, but Tupac kind of turns that hate and shows what it's doing to the community back on itself. A lot of his music was like that. Although one character notes, Tupac wasn't exempt from being hateful himself, because some of his lyrics were homophobic as well. And I do think it's interesting to sort of compare Tupac to people like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr., who were big in the black community and spoke out on issues that affected them and helped fight for some civil rights. Maybe Tupac wasn't as big of an activist, but he was out there talking about these issues. And all of these people were cut down in their prime. Some people argue that Tupac was murdered by a close associate, and other people argue that MLK and Malcolm X were killed by the government, and there's some evidence to support those things. But they were both cut down in their prime, and they were both examples of black people who were uniting the black community to sort of strengthen it, and the powers that be might not necessarily like that. And with this all comes like huge mourning after his death. It hits these characters pretty hard. So you can see like the significance of cultural heroes and why you might need those cultural heroes. Because if you don't have anyone to really look to, then you might feel down. Like Dee might not have her big purpose. She might not feel seen, and who knows what might come of that if you don't feel seen and feel like there's someone out there who understands you. Woodson's also talking about the struggle here, which Woodson talks about pretty frequently with her writing. You see multiple characters highlight the ongoing struggle in black life and living in a very tough situation in this story. It's difficult for characters to pay bills on time. There's struggles in the foster care system, especially for black individuals. There's a lot of research being done that shows that it's often a pipeline from the foster care system to prison. It seems built to keep black individuals under the thumb of the oppressive system in which they live. And you see that the problem with the justice system with Tash's story in here, Tash going to jail for a crime he didn't really commit, and the issue being Tash tried to explain, I wasn't in on it, but the police didn't really listen to him or take in any of the evidence. They just assumed that he needed to go to jail. And he was released, but that was time he didn't really need to spend in jail. And it was an unsafe environment for him because the people who got him put in jail tried to get him hurt in the process. And he had to fight back and enact a great violence, which surely doesn't make you feel good. Another thing that's said by Jay Jones in this story is that brothers be hunted, specifically talking about how the oppressive system at large, particularly police officers, look at black men and seek to arrest them or jail them because of the color of their skin. A lot of instances in the United States in particular of bias in policing that nobody ever really wants to address. And even Jay Jones says, if you better not get a fancy car because the police will arrest you for that because they don't believe that you actually own that. And so like Jay Jones in particular in this story is struggling because he wants to become a basketball player and provide for his family, but there's so many obstacles in that way because of the struggle, because of the oppression that these communities face. Now I will say there's a lot of interesting writing in that regard, but at times, like, it feels vague, like they're not putting an actual name to this oppression. Like the struggle is there, but I think Woodson kind of just like hand waves at times. Maybe she doesn't feel like younger readers might fully understand, or they're not ready to hear this sort of thing. But I also think that this sort of struggle, at least for Dee, just sort of ends once she goes back and lives with her mom. It doesn't really seem to be that much of a factor. Like, congrats, your mom is back now. There might be a little bit of a struggle, but you're never going to feel this oppression again. I don't think Woodson goes necessarily that far with this, but a lot of it does seem to be fixed because she gets to go back and be with her mom. And so what I think ultimately happens here is you get the same problem that I experienced with the book Paper Names by Susie Liu, which is an interesting book that deals with the immigration problems of immigrating from China, and the racism and injustices that you experience in America, and how, white people have privilege and whatnot. And a lot of that is kind of present here, but like with Paper Names, it's like you have all of that, but you don't wrap the story in a coherent narrative in a lot of ways. Like it's not enough to simply gesture towards that and say, hey, look at this thing. When writing a story, you have to sort of envelop into it. And that way, If Beale Street Could Talk does that particularly well. James Baldwin does a really good job there. But that was intended for adults, although any age group can read it. Here, this is middle grade literature, and I do think that Woodson is kind of underestimating her audience and what they're capable of understanding with this writing. There are other interesting elements, though, like finding your people, Dee's relationship with Nika and the narrator, and how they all kind of rely on each other, and it provides them with happiness and joy to sort of feel that connection in the community. And then related to that is the need for a community, because if these people don't kind of unite and fight against their oppressors, it's going to swallow them up whole, as it has done in the past. So that's a very kind of important side aspect of this story. Now, there are a number of problems as well. As I mentioned before, the story beats are kind of vague. Like, there's a talk of Tash going to prison, but there wasn't really a setup for that to happen. It's just, he's just sort of in prison. And there's not really a lot of struggle in him getting out of prison. There's no arc to follow there. It's just sort of one chapter, and then it's over. Jay Jones's struggle is there, but it's not really fully fleshed out. The narrator doesn't really have a central arc, so a lot of the story feels like there's no central conflict guiding it forward. The conflict is racism itself, but again, I don't think that's enough to carry the story through. And the narrator also doesn't really feel defined in the story. Like, we don't find out their name. Like, we see the story, like, the story feels like it's actually about Dee and Nika more so than the narrator. But if the narrator is living in this community, shouldn't they be feeling some sort of conflict? Shouldn't there be some sort of similar issues that they're facing? Maybe not every black individual in these communities has the same problem, or feels the same way about the oppression, or experiences the oppression in the same way. But it certainly makes for a less interesting story that the narrator doesn't feel like a full part of it in that way. And there's just one last thing worth noting about this story, is it is a Newbery winner, and so we have to ask, like, is it worth it? Does it deserve it? Does it hold up after all these years? It has been 14, 16, 17 years since it was written. I do think a lot of what's being written holds up. Black Brothers Be Hunted is certainly something you can apply to today, with like the George Floyd murder, and a bunch of other black men dying at very young ages. I do think some of the story elements hold up in that regard, but the story itself feels pretty bare bones, and I don't think it's as developed as other Newbery honorees, or even Newbery winners that I've read before. So I think, while I wouldn't say that it doesn't deserve to be nominated, I think that there are other stories that have told this type of story in the past. If Beale Street Could Talk, as I've said before, and they've told this type of story, and they've done it more effectively, and they've done a better, more well-written job of highlighting these kinds of ideas and telling a more beautiful narrative as well. Anyway, those are my thoughts on After Tupac and Dee Foster by Jacqueline Woodson. I'd say a pretty interesting story, one that certainly has a lot of things for middle grade readers to think about, but I also think middle grade readers deserve to be treated as, to be treated seriously, and to be given, serious narratives about these sort of things, rather than just something that's kind of bare bones. Yeah, I wouldn't say I recommend it, but if you find this at your local library, definitely seek it out and read it. Like, it can't hurt that way. But I don't think this is one that you should be pursuing and adding to your library. As again, there's other stories that have done the exact same thing in a much better manner, I would say. If you have any thoughts on the story or you want to say something about my review, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about this book or this author if they don't already know. Join the Discord in the description below if you want to have, again, more conversations about media, books, TV, that sort of thing. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and Tupac listening to travels. Farewell.